I used to think there were two kinds of heartbreak, the kind that arrives obvious and loud, and the kind that never announces itself at all. Being a twin taught me there is a third kind, the one that trades on your certainty and then slips out the back door wearing your face. My name is Amira and my twin is Hannah, and if you've ever wondered whether two people can share a childhood, a birthday, a room, a mirror, a secret language and still become strangers, I'm here to tell you yes. We spent years being halves of the same sentence, and then one day she chose a stranger over me and the sentence went quiet in the middle, and I was left holding grammar that didn't make sense anymore. We grew up in a small apartment that always smelled faintly of cumin and detergent, with a balcony just wide enough to hold two plastic chairs and an argument about who needed the sun more. We measured time in exam weeks and mango seasons, and the calendar on our wall belonged to both of us because everything did. Our mother braided our hair tight enough to hold the day together. Our father insisted we learn to fix things. A loose doorknob, a leaking tap, a mood. You don't wait for someone else to come, he'd say, handing us a screwdriver, and we'd roll our eyes in unison and fix it anyway. There were twinhood tricks we learned early: how to swap seats without the teacher noticing, how to split one apology between two mouths so it sounded sincere, how to stand back to back and know which way to turn without speaking. But the best part wasn't the tricks. It was the knowing. There is a quiet that happens when you live beside someone who learned to read your breathing before you learned to read. When I woke from nightmares, Hannah would already be there, demanding details I would forget by morning. When she was sick, I snuck saltines under the blanket and Dottie's stories into the room like contraband. We shared clothes, crushes, a diary with 2 locks and 1 key, and when we were 10 we cut our hair into matching bobs and then cried because we looked too identical and taped our names to our shirts for a week so the world would remember we were also separate. Everything felt like a joint account until high school taught us that attention is a currency too. Hannah was the one who shimmered under fluorescent lights and phone cameras, the first to volunteer, the one teachers called on when they needed the class to wake up. I was the one who finished group projects at midnight and remembered birthdays and half the time forgot to claim credit because I loved watching her win. If it sounds like resentment, it wasn't then. She was brave enough to demand, and I was stubborn enough to give, equal parts grace and mistake. We promised each other things other sisters promise silently and never keep. We would choose each other first. We wouldn't keep secrets big enough to build walls. We would tell the truth, even if it hurt. We believed we could make new rules for a world that loves breaking old ones. We went to the same university and pretended we hadn't just to prove something to ourselves. She studied media and design and came home smelling like ink and ambition. I studied literature and came home smelling like libraries and drafts. We still split a wardrobe and a grocery list and the bathroom mirror. But our days took different shapes. She thrived on critiques and pitches in rooms full of people who say brand like a religion. I wrote essays at 2 a.m. about women who carried deserts in their mouths and learned to spit oceans. We still met at the end of the day on the balcony for tea and a debrief. She'd talk with her hands. I'd listen with mine. If one of us arrived late, the other forgave her without counting. It seemed unthinkable that there could be a door either of us would close. Then it rained on a day that wasn't supposed to rain, and Hannah came home soaked and incandescent, carrying an umbrella that wasn't ours and a story that didn't feel like mine. He gave it to me, she said, setting the umbrella on our mat like a trophy. Just handed it over. Said, looks like you need this more than I do. Who says that and actually means it? His name was Zane, she told me, like a secret she didn't want to keep but also didn't want to give away carelessly. He worked in a creative agency where people wore sneakers to big meetings and used words like disrupt about cereal. He had a laugh that made other people laugh at their own laughter. He texted her a photo of the sky through the hole in his umbrella a night later and wrote, I think it was worth it. And she showed me and we giggled like we were still 15. The first weeks were pink and predictable in a way that felt safe. He knew the good cafes and the one stall in the market that sells the exact kind of olives Hannah pretends are a personality. He asked questions and listened. The intoxicating combination that makes women hand over their pasts like passports. He sent playlists that felt like he had tapped a vein in her wrist and found a rhythm worth worshipping. She glowed in the way people glow when attention is both generous and well-timed. I liked him in the way you like a friend's good haircut. It suits her. It saves you a few worries. I even liked how he said my name careful like it was a button he didn't want to press too hard. Then the umbrella closed around them and left me standing outside. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It was little absences first. She was late to our Friday movie night and then didn't come at all. She canceled our morning run because I had a late call with his team in Dubai. She forgot to buy yogurt and came home with a story instead. The balcony debrief shortened. Her phone filled the chair where I used to sit. The first time she missed our birthday pancakes, I cut into mine and ate anyway. Because hunger doesn't wait for betrayal to finish dressing itself. She arrived hours later, sugar on her cheeks, eyes tired and apologetic in a way that tried to be charming. He planned a surprise, she said. You would have liked it. I would have liked being invited, I didn't say. I washed the pan and pretended my hands weren't shaking. I started learning the shape of a fight without sound. We didn't yell, we pivoted. She drew privacy around herself like a new coat, and I learned to get cold. I asked how her day went and she said fine with a smile that had no temperature. I asked if Zayn would come to our cousin's wedding and she rolled her eyes and said, "Why does everything have to be about him?" And I blinked as if I hadn't just offered the smallest of questions to a woman who used to calculate her shoe size on my toes. She changed her passwords without telling me and left her phone face down. I swallowed so many sentences I forgot how to recognize my own voice when it did make it out. The stranger didn't stay a stranger. He became a situation. Hannah started building a life that required maps I didn't own. She began staying over at his place on weeknights because the commute is shorter, and the jacket she used to grab from the hook by our door migrated to his without ceremony. Her side of our closet looked like a model apartment, staged and unlived in. She rearranged her schedule around his, as if his clock had a better relationship with time. When I pushed back, it sounded petty even to my ears. Can we do Thursday instead of Tuesday? I'd ask and she'd say, he likes Thursdays for his runs, and I'd nod as if that were a reason, not a preference. It didn't feel like losing a person. It felt like losing a language we used to speak fluently and now only she used, and only to translate him. The first time she said she was moving out, we were arguing about laundry, which is how the deepest truths prefer to arrive, folded inside domestic disasters. I had moved her clothes from the machine to the counter because my wash cycle was about to start, and she came in hot and hurt from a separate fight with him and unloaded on me like I was a safe that could take it. You never think, she said, which is not a sentence anyone who loves you should be able to say and not regret. What's this really about? I asked, and the answer wore 3 words like a knife. I'm moving out. I laughed because panic sometimes looks like comedy. Since when? Since soon, she said. Zayn found a place. I stared at her and counted all the times I had thought we were telling each other everything. When were you going to tell me? I said. Now, she said, hands on her hips, a posture we once shared before foot races. This isn't choosing him over you, she added, reading a script I recognized from a million online fights. It's choosing myself. But the set was wrong and the line fell flat. This was choosing him. It's okay to say it if it's true. She didn't. She packed quietly that week and took half the forks and most of the light. After she left, the apartment felt like a museum dedicated to a friendship. Artifacts everywhere, explanations missing. I cooked too much food and put leftovers in containers labeled H, before throwing the labels away. I ignored her social feeds until a photo found me anyway. Her hand in his with a caption about forever that made everyone else's hearts react. No tag for me. No invitation. Our parents asked practical questions we answered with fiction because the truth had grown fangs and we didn't want it biting them. Twins fight, they said, and I smiled as if all I had lost was a hair tie. Grief is a chore more than a storm. I did it daily. I woke and didn't text her and bore the silence. I walked past the cafe where we had invented 1,000 futures, and realized none of them included me getting left behind by a man with a good umbrella. I went to class and wrote papers that almost said what I meant and got A's that felt like participation trophies for the wrong competition. I joined a poetry group because strangers were safer witnesses than a family that hears he's good to me and calls it love. I ate dinner with friends who did not ask where she was because their friendship didn't use her as a mirror. When the engagement photos went up, I turned my phone over like it was guilty. Our parents went to the wedding wearing their thinnest smiles and came home with leftover sweets and a story about how beautiful she looked, both of which felt like apologies from a universe that had called the wrong number. Months passed and I got better at being a solo act, which is a sentence I never thought I'd use unironically. I learned how to carry grocery bags without the second hand that used to catch the slipping. I bought a new plant and kept it alive because something in the house should still respond when spoken to gently. I ran in the mornings and wrote at night and taught myself how to be a person not in relation to a sister but in relation to a self. If this sounds noble, it wasn't. It was sweaty and boring and full of small victories like figuring out which light bulb fit the kitchen and how to read her absence without making it the only thing on the page. When she finally called, a year had scabbed over the wound and I had stopped picking it every hour. The number was unknown and my body recognized it before my mind caught up. There is a frequency your bones remember. Can we meet? She asked, and my mouth answered yes before the history testified. We chose a cafe we never liked together, neutral ground. She looked thinner in the way your soul sometimes diets on attention it can no longer digest. Her hands shook and she tucked them under the table like bad children. I made a mistake, she said, and somewhere inside me a petty choir sang. And somewhere closer to the surface a grown woman put a hand up for silence. I pushed you away because I needed to prove to him and to myself that I could build a life without you, she said, eyes on the cup she wasn't drinking. But the life I built didn't have room for me either. She told me about the slow boil, the preferences that became rules, the phone checks that became audits, the compliments that became currency. She told me about the first time he chose shame over accountability and she smoothed it like a wrinkle and called it stress. She told me the second and third times too. She did not tell me everything because she didn't have to. You can read a book without visiting every page if you live through the writing. I thought you were trying to keep me small, she whispered. I see now you were trying to keep me safe. I said, I missed you. And the two words were both accusation and absolution, and we cried the way adults cry in public, quietly and into napkins, as if grief can be polite. She moved out soon after, into a clean apartment with a lock that answered only to her key. She filed papers that have long names and long stories behind them. Our mother held her hand over tea and our father learned how to not give advice and I learned how to be a witness without being a savior. The first night she slept in that new bed, she called me just to listen to me breathe, and I fell asleep with the phone pressed to my ear like a ribbon we tied across the city, so we wouldn't get lost. We rebuilt, not the old way, careless and assumed, but the new way. Planned, deliberate, with scaffolding and warning signs. We made weekly dinners non-negotiable, and a list of 5 topics we would not weaponize against each other no matter how much history begged. We practiced apologies before we needed them and forgiveness after we did. You could stop reading here and call it redemption, but families are not novels and twins are not myth. There were setbacks. There was the day she saw him across the street and shook so hard she spilled coffee on a woman who had done nothing but buy a drink and step into a river of someone else's past. There were the nights she called me at 3 a.m. and I answered like a reflex and we used breathing exercises as if they were spells. There was the cousin who told her with the casual cruelty some people don't even register as blood. At least he married you first. And Hannah laughed and then went to the bathroom to cry and I followed and held the door shut against a world that thinks survival is hysterical. There was the moment at a family gathering when an aunt pulled me aside and said, "You filled her head with ideas," and I said, "No, with mirrors," and she smiled like she'd never considered that she'd been walking around without one. There was the afternoon we went to the stupid mall we loved when we were 15 and tried on sunglasses and pretended that getting older is mostly about having better taste. And then she froze in front of a store because a song the DJ was playing had been their song and I stood next to her like a tree until the music changed and only then did she move. I won't pretend the stranger stayed the villain. People are messier than neat endings, and monsters rarely walk around hissing. Months after the divorce, he emailed a letter that used all the right words in all the wrong ways: therapy, growth, accountability, as if saying them could conjure the axe. Hannah read it aloud to me on the balcony, and then we lit it in an ashtray and watched the words curl into ash. "Even if he becomes better," she said, and looked at me, and I nodded so she didn't have to finish. "We don't owe our healed selves to the ones who broke us." I dated and she didn't, and then she did and I didn't because we are not one thing. The first man I liked after all of this laughed too loudly at his own jokes and apologized too little for being late and reminded me of every man who insists his charm is a personality. I left before the second drink. The second one asked about Hannah on the first date and I left then too, because even generosity has a boundary and mine is my sister's name in a stranger's mouth. She met a woman in her ceramics class who says kiln the way other people say prayer, and they took it slow because both of them had learned that speed is not always proof of certainty. The first time I saw them together, the brightness had returned to Hannah's face in a way that did not require squinting. We found a rhythm that didn't mimic the old one but nodded to it, like a remix that keeps the original hook. We made Sunday breakfasts again and let ourselves be late. We took a trip to the coast we had promised each other when we were 14 and convinced that somewhere there is an ocean with our names written in the foam. We swam in water so cold it forced our bodies to confess, and we floated on our backs and named clouds like children whose first language was wonder. We talked about our mother's hands getting smaller and our father's jokes getting longer, and the way the city smells before rain. We didn't talk about him unless the conversation knocked and knew the password. And when it did, we let it in, gave it water, and asked it to leave by sunset. If you're asking whether I forgave her, the answer is both easy and complicated. I never stopped loving her, which is not the same thing. I forgave the parts of her that were scared and lonely and eager to be chosen. I forgave the versions of me that turned my fear into control, that tried to hold her life in my hands and call it care. I did not forgive the choice to disappear without a goodbye, but I learned to live beside it the way you live beside a scar. Sometimes it aches when it rains and you don't hate the rain for it. We have new vows, ones we wrote after the ones we broke. We will tell each other the truth about our lovers even when the truth is unflattering. We will ask questions the moment they become urgent, not after they become weapons. We will not count who shows up more, only that we both do. We will be each other's first emergency contact and last resort. It would be convenient to blame the stranger for everything, to hold him up like a statue labeled cause. But people don't fall out of orbit because a planet is beautiful. They fall because gravity gets negotiated when nobody is looking. I made excuses for her long before he arrived. She practiced leaving in tiny ways before she walked out in a big one. When he took, it was because we had taught her that giving without ledger is a virtue and taught me that asking for return is selfish. Unlearning is heavy work. We are lifting it together now, one repetition at a time, both of us sweating and laughing and occasionally dropping the weight on our toes. If what you want is a clean ending, I can't give it to you. We are still twins and sometimes we still fight about ridiculous things like who forgot to buy milk and then stare at each other and remember that at least we are here, arguing in a kitchen we rebuilt. There are days I catch her looking at me like I'm a memory she doesn't trust, and then she smiles and the present rushes back in. There are mornings she wakes panicked because a dream borrowed the old house and filled it with shouting, and I make tea and we sit on the floor and talk about nothing until the fear gets bored and leaves. There are hours where we don't speak for reasons that have nothing to do with trauma, work, life, sleep, and it doesn't scare us the way silence used to, because we have learned which quiet is distance and which is rest. Our mother, who raised two girls with two different appetites for the world, tells us now that she used to watch us sleep and worry she would never be able to feed both futures. We laugh and tell her we made our own snacks. Our father apologizes for teaching us to fix everything and not teaching us how to walk away from the broken without carrying the shards. We forgive him because we are better carpenters now. We know which cracks need resin and which need light. The balcony still holds two plastic chairs, upgraded to wooden ones we found on sale, and we still sit there as the day folds in, and sometimes we count the birds like we used to count neighbors' arguments, and sometimes we don't because we have nothing to prove to the sky. I think about the day she left and the day she came back and how they are not mirrors. One was an exit wound and the other a door. I think about what it means to choose a stranger over your twin and how there is a way to read that sentence that condemns her and a way that frees us both. She chose a stranger because the stranger promised a version of herself she thought I couldn't hold. He was wrong about her and I was wrong about me. Now we choose each other with eyes open, knowing love is not a birthright but a practice, not a mirror but a window, not a handcuff but a rope we both hold, loosely enough to breathe and tightly enough to stay. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet except for the trash truck and the two teenagers down the lane rehearsing their band's first hit that will never be written, I wonder about other twins in other apartments learning where their edges are. I hope they are kinder to themselves than we were. I hope they know that you can be half of something without being half of yourself. I hope when a stranger arrives with perfect timing and an umbrella, they share it and also keep theirs, because rain is not romantic when you're cold. If there's a lesson, it isn't big enough for a poster. It's small and persistent, like the way we remind each other to drink water. When love asks you to disappear to prove it exists, that isn't love. When family asks you to stay no matter what, that isn't loyalty. It's laziness. When you feel the floor tilt under you, Call someone who knows how your voice sounds when you're lying to yourself. When your sister chooses a stranger, breathe. Don't make yourself a stranger too. Keep a chair empty on the balcony. Keep the light on over the stove. Keep the plant watered. Keep a list of questions you will ask gently when she is ready to hear them. Keep your own life moving forward in the direction of your dignity. And if she comes back, let the door be open enough to walk through and strong enough to close again if it needs to. The other day we went to the market where the fruit seller knows our faces and our preferences and our family tree better than we do. He handed us 2 oranges instead of 1 and said, "For the twins," and we smiled and didn't correct him even though we haven't been that set of words in a long time. We paid and argued about nothing and took the long way home just to see the street where the bougainvillea climbs like it believes in itself. We climbed the stairs and set the oranges on the counter and looked at each other and burst into laughter because the oranges rolled toward each other and stopped, touching, as if the kitchen itself had learned how to stage metaphors. "We're ridiculous," she said. "We always were," I replied. We ate the oranges leaning over the sink so the juice didn't run down our arms. It did anyway. We didn't mind. At night, when we turn off the lights, I sometimes think about the girl who left and the woman who returned and how they are the same person carrying different maps. I think about the stranger and hope he finds a version of himself that doesn't require making anyone else smaller to feel big. I think about the future and it doesn't scare me the way it did when I thought all my certainties were born on the same day as me. I know now that we are not each other's proof of existence. We are each other's witnesses. When I speak, she nods like court. When she cries, I fetch tissues and a joke. When I fail, she does not keep score. When she wins, I clap without counting the minutes until it's my turn. If you're listening because you think choosing a stranger over family is a verdict you can never appeal, let me offer evidence to the contrary. You can choose wrong and still be worthy of being chosen again. You can close a door and open a window in the same house. You can pick someone else and learn, painfully and publicly, that you should have picked yourself, and then you can start. The truth is not that my twin chose a stranger over me. The truth is that she chose a story that didn't have room for both of us, and then when the story turned on her, she chose to write a different one, and she asked if I would help. I said yes, not because I forgot the first story, but because I remembered the first promise. We would tell the truth even if it hurt. It did. It does. It also heals. I don't know how many words this is or whether it is enough to span the distance between the girl I was and the woman I'm becoming, but I know this. The next time it rains, I'll carry my own umbrella. I'll share it if you need. I won't stand in the storm without one just to prove I love you. And if Hannah shows up soaked and laughing, I'll let her in and we'll make tea and we'll sit on the balcony. And when the wind lifts the curtain like a hand and the city gleams under streetlights as if it chose to be beautiful for us, we'll look at each other and see not halves, not mirrors, not replacements, but 2 people who learned the hardest way that staying is also a choice, and this time we're making it together.